everyone. Hope you are doing good. So from this video we are going to talk about learning, the basics of learning, also its process and teaching approaches. So let's get started. First we'll see what is learning. Learning is a relatively permanent change in an organism's behavior due to experience. Learning can involve development of new skills, changes in existing behavior, simple associations, and also learning simple belief systems. So when we're talking about development of new skills, for example, I am learning how to ride a bike. So learning how to ride a bike is the development of a new skill. And the next one, changes in existing behavior. For example, we'll say she's learning to control her temper. So temper is an existing behavior. So the change is trying to control. And next, simple associations. For example, if we say, I finally learned that where there is smoke, there is fire. So association between smoke and fire. Then the fourth one, learning simplex belief systems. For example, if we say he's trying to learn the Buddhist view of life. So Buddhist view of life is a belief system and trying to learn it. Also, we also figure things out for ourselves. Example, learning a mathematical formula. Also, learning can also be imposed on us by circumstances. For example, if you touch a hot stove, you will burn your hand. Moving on, Associationism by Locke and Berkeley. So first we'll see what is Associationism. It is a theory that connects learning to thoughts based on principles of organisms' causal history. Since its early roots, associationists have sought to use the history of an organism's experience as the main sculptor of cognitive architecture. Then we have associative learning, a form of conditioning, a theory that states behavior can be modified or learned based on stimulus and a response. This means that behavior can be learned or unlearned based on the response it generates. For example, when you hear the word flower, what comes to your mind? Probably the smell and the sight of a flower, right? So when you hear the word stove, what comes to your mind? Probably the sensation of heat. So the more the complex the learning, there will be more associations. Then we are going to talk about study of animals. Study of animals reveals same principles of learning that apply to humans. So learning in animals can be threefold. First we have habituation, then classical conditioning, and then operant conditioning. First we look at habituation. So this is one of the simplest forms of learning. Habituation simply means decline in response of organisms to stimulus once that stimulus becomes familiar. So a common way occurs in which a person's attention is captured by a loud or a sudden stimulus. For example, a person who moves to a house on a busy street may initially be distracted every time a loud vehicle drives by. So after living in this house for some time, however, the person will no longer be distracted by the street noise. So the person becomes habituated to it and the initial response disappears. So our environments are full of sight and sounds. Habituation allows us to ignore repetitive unimportant stimuli. Also, habituation occurs in nearly all organisms, from human beings to animals. Next, we have classical conditioning by Ivan Pavlov. I have spoken about classical conditioning in detail in one of my previous videos. You can watch the second part of personality to get a more clearer idea. So, classical conditioning means a form of learning in which a new involuntary response is acquired as a result of two stimuli being presented at the same time. So, we look at this example. So, once you present food to a dog, the dog starts responding. We call it unconditional response. The response is the dog salivates. So, without presenting the food to the dog, if we blow a whistle, the dog doesn't show any response. So, that's before conditioning. And during conditioning, if we blow the whistle along with the food, the dog knows, okay, this is time for his meals. So, there will be an unconditional response, which is the dog salivates. So, after conditioning, what happens is, without presenting the food, when you just whistle, the dog knows, okay, this is the time for his meal, and the dog starts salivating as an unconditional response. Then we have operant conditioning by B.F. Skinner. This is a form of learning in which voluntary response come to be controlled by their consequences. So, I have spoken about operant conditioning as well in my second video of personality. You can refer that. So, here we are going to look at the experiment that B.F. Skinner used. So, let's say he used a special box known as Skinner box for his experiment on rats. There are two experiments. First, we look at the first experiment. So, in this experiment, he placed a hungry rat inside the Skinner box. The rat was initially inactive inside the box, but gradually, as it began to adapt to the environment of the box, it began to explore around. And then eventually the rat discovered a lever upon pressing which food was released inside the box. So after it filled its hunger, it started exploring the box again, and after a while it pressed the lever for the second time as it grew hungry again. So this phenomenon continued for the third, fourth and fifth time, and after a while the hungry rat immediately pressed the lever once it was placed in the box. Then the conditioning was deemed to be complete. Here, the action of pressing the lever is an operant response, or we can call it as operant behavior, and the food released inside the chamber is the reward. So the experiment is also known as the instrumental conditioning learning, as the response is instrumental in getting food. This experiment also deals with and explains the effects of positive reinforcement. Upon pressing the lever, the hungry rat was served with food, which filled its hunger. Hence, it is a positive reinforcement. So, now we'll talk about a second experiment. This second experiment explained negative reinforcement. So, Skinner placed a rat in a chamber in the similar manner, but instead of keeping it hungry, he subjected the chamber to an unpleasant electric current. The rat, having experienced the discomfort, started to desperately move around the box and accidentally knocked the lever. So pressing of the lever immediately ceased the flow of unpleasant current. After a few times, the rat had smartened enough to go directly to the lever in order to prevent itself from the discomfort. So the electric current reacted as the negative reinforcement, and the consequence of escaping the electric current made sure that the rat repeated the action again and again. Here too, the pressing of the lever is an operant response, and the complete stop of the electric current flow is its reward. Moving on, the learning process. Teachers' perspectives on learning. For teachers, learning usually refers to things that happen in schools or classrooms. But learning happens outside of these places as well. So teachers' perspectives on learning can be threefold: curriculum, content, and academic achievement, sequencing and readiness, and the importance of transferring learning to a new or future situation. First, we look at viewing learning as dependent on curriculum. This emphasizes whatever is taught in schools deliberately, both the official curriculum and the various behaviors and routines. Teachers equate learning with the major forms of academic achievements, especially language and mathematics, and to a lesser extent musical skill, physical coordination, or social sensitivity. Then we have viewing learning as dependent on sequencing and readiness. Readiness means students' preparation to cope with or profit from the activities and expectations of school. So let's see signs of readiness in students and signs of readiness in teachers. So when we talk about signs of readiness in students, there's a productive vocabulary of 5,000 to 8,000 words, and child understands and uses complete sentences. Child questions tend to be relevant to the task at hand. Child correctly using most common grammatical constructions. Child can match some letters to some sounds. Child can string a few letters together to make a few simple words. Child can tell and retell stories, poems, and songs. Signs of readiness in teachers. Teacher answers children's questions when possible. Teacher encourages child to find out more through other means in addition to asking teacher. Teacher asks questions designed to elaborate or expand child's thinking. Teacher highlights letters and sounds in the classroom. Teacher provides lots of paper and marking tools. Teacher assists child with initial writing of letters. Also, teacher encourages children to enact stories, poems, and songs. Viewing learning as transferring to new or future situations. Transfer means the ability to use knowledge or skills in situations beyond the ones in which they are acquired. Moving on, major models of learning. There are two major models, behaviorism and constructivism. Behaviorism simply means learning as changes in overt behavior. Overt behavior means observable behavior. So behaviorism focuses on changes in individuals' observable behaviors, changes in what people say or do. So behaviorism focuses on attention on behavior instead of on thought. For example, if we take cooking meals, you are more focused on whether you could actually produce edible food than whether you could explain recipes and cooking procedures to others. Another example, let's say driving a car. You are concerned primarily whether you could actually do the driving, not whether you could describe or explain how to drive. In classroom, behaviorism is most useful for identifying relationships between specific action by a student and the immediate precursors, that consequences of the action. So it is less useful for understanding changes in students' thinking. Then constructivism simply means learning as change in thinking. So this is a perspective on learning focused on how students actively create or construct knowledge out of experience. Constructivist models of learning differ about how much a learner constructs knowledge independently compared to how much he or she takes cues from people who may be more of an expert and who help the learner's efforts. So there are two constructivisms: psychological constructivism and social constructivism. Psychological constructivism means changes in thinking resulting from individual experience, and social constructivism means changes in thinking due to assistance from others. Then we look at teaching approaches. There are three approaches. First, we have the constructivist approach, simply means learner-centered approach. This emphasizes the individual actively constructing their knowledge and understanding. Next, we have the direct instruction approach, simply means teacher-centered approach. So, important goal is to maximize student learning time. Effective teachers use both a constructivist and a direct instruction approach depending on the circumstances and individual student needs. Then we have differentiated instruction, simply means individual variations in knowledge, readiness, interest, etc. So this emphasizes tailoring assignments to meet students' needs and abilities. Promoting self-motivated students. So you should provide real-world learning opportunities. Also, select learning opportunities of optimal difficulty and novelty. Also, allow students to make choices in line with their personal interest. Also, give children the opportunity to think creatively and deeply about projects. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you need any help regarding notes and more facts, please do contact me via cascade.psychology@gmail.com. So watch my next video, Learning Motivation, as the second part of learning. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you.